Hey, I'm Kev Care, Mr. Kern. Welcome to a very different opening for Power Oversteer. As on Monday night in the US or Tuesday morning over here in the UK, we found out the terrible news that Andretti Autosport driver Justin Wilson had succumbed to injuries he had sustained in that accident at Pocono on Sunday. He was only 37 years old, and I'll begin by saying that my thoughts are with his family at this very difficult time, with his friends, and with the IndyCar community. We lost a special guy, it seems, as we have seen with the tributes and the tales that have come out since his passing at the beginning of the week. And we found out how he was so much more than just a racing driver, how he was a gentle giant, how humble and kind he was. He was dyslexic, and he raised awareness of that, and visited kids and basically tried to inspire them to overcome that, and aspire to basically just be like him, achieve great things, despite having that condition. And I think nothing kind of personifies more how great of a person he was than being able to save 6 lives after his untimely passing, by being an organ donor. But I can't add to those fantastic tributes. I was never fortunate enough to meet him, but I did see him on my TV screen for over 15 years as a amazing racing driver, a fighter, with this silent determination to achieve great things, and he did in his his career. I first got to see him on my screen back in his F3000 days at the turn of the century. As before then, he kind of struggled to move up the single-seater ladder. He's driving Vauxhall Opals, I believe, in the mid-90s, and then Formula Palmeraldi came along in 1998, and he won the inaugural championship and moved to Astra Omega in 1999 in F3000. And I watched it earlier this week, his debut in the series at Imola, and he scored a point when they only paid to the top 6, and it's a very tough series back then. You had Nick Heidfeld, winning it, and yeah, that's an amazing achievement to step up a series like that back then and scoring your debut. And in 2000 he moved to Nordic Racing, that familiar red car, and got loads of podiums, finished 5th in the championship. And so for 2001 he's kind of set for an assault on the championship, with Coca-Cola back in, with Thomas Enger being a very strong teammate, and he blitzed everyone. He won the championship by a country mile from Mark Webber and Enger, and particularly in the second half of the season he was just so impressive. He won 3 races. His debut win was at Interlagos, where he spun after he crossed the line. Kept all 4 corners on the car though, and we kind of expected him to step up to F1 in 2002, but unfortunately he's very tall. He's 6 foot 3.5 inches tall, and F1 cars aren't gonna be made for drivers of that height, unfortunately, and he didn't have much sponsorship. So before it became cool, really, he went on the stock market and people could invest in Justin Wilson, and lots of people did, and they raised the sponsorship to grab a seat for 2003, a seat that was kind of reserved for him by Paul Stoddard at Minardi. And Minardi kind of designed a car to fit him, and he did a great job in that car alongside Jos Verstappen. And the thing I remember from his Minardi days was the starts. He wasn't the fastest car, of course, but on that first lap they could get up high in the order, and I think it was Malaysia, but he was on the outskirts of the top 10, with Verstappen a couple places behind him. It was incredible. the starts that they could get, and that was a feature of the 2003 season. It's not just like Alonso and Renault having those superb starts. It was also those Minardis as well. And then he had that stint at Jaguar at the end of the year when his ex-F3000 rival Antonio Pizzoni got sacked, and he had those 5 races to impress, and he certainly did. As we've all seen, I think, in the past week, how he out-qualified the Ferraris in his first qualifying session at Hockenheim. And then, quite fittingly, he scored his only F1 point in the American Grand Prix in a race that was like changeable conditions and a bit crazy. And he went through the field and finished in 8th place in the end. And he kind of deserved that seat for 2004 even, but Christian Klein had Red Bull backing, and that team became Red Bull Racing in 2005. So Wilson had to look elsewhere, drove at Le Mans in a dome alongside Ralph Ehrman and Tom Cornell, but he made his home in America in the Champ Car Series at Conquest. Not a top team by any means, never won a race, never had a driver challenge for a title, even the top 10 really in the championship, but Wilson did that in 2004. No challenge for the podiums on occasions, never got one, finished 11th in the standings and a second best rookie behind AJ Allmendinger. And then those two became teammates at the new Rouge Sport team in 2005. I think it was new in 2005, correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, he won the team's debut race, I believe, at Toronto, overtaking Oriol Serba late in the race, finished 3rd in the championship ahead of Allmendinger. And in 2006 he became runner-up to the almighty Newman Haas and Sebastian Bourdais. And he did the same again in 2007. He won at Edmonton in 2006. I've seen the picture of him after he's done his donuts in front of the crowd, standing on his car. And in 2007 he won at Assen, in a car, not in a bike. And he also won at Mexico City in 2005. And 2008 was meant to be the year for him to be the man in Champ Car as he moved to Newman Haas, replacing Bourdais. He went to F1. And the merger happened, and so he and Newman Haas were on the back foot, in a series they never raced in, before the IndyCar Series, but still, he won a race at Detroit. He's known as this kind of road and street course specialist, and he definitely showed it on that day. Cashinevas was blocking too much. Wilson got by, and it was the last win that Paul Newman, I believe, saw. Before he passed away. And then in 2009 he moved to Dale Coyne, an even smaller team, this tiny team. He's not even, say, comparable to, say, Minardi used to be in F1, just this really tiny kind of family team. And then they had their magical day in Watkins Glen, one of the best moments I've still ever seen in IndyCar, in open wheel racing, perhaps in the whole of motorsport I've seen. Having their day in the sun at Watkins Glen, beating the mighty Penske and Chip Ganassi, that year. And nobody knows winning a race before Wilson really came along at that team, and he finished 9th in the standings at the end in that tiny team, finishing 9th in the standings. And then he moved to Giant Marlboro Racing, got a pole at Toronto, I believe, in 2010, and finished just outside the top 10, I think, in those standings. And then 2011 didn't quite work out as his season got cut short after injuring his back in a crash at Mid-Ohio. And then he went back to Dale Coyne in 2012 and won on an oval at Texas. He's not just this, road and course, street course specialist. He was now this all-round driver, and he showed that at Texas when Graham Rahal, tapped the wall late in the race, and Wilson came by and grabbed his only oval win, Dale Coyne's only oval win at the moment. And then in 2013 he was amazing in that car. I think he finished in the top 5 in the Indy 500, could have been there for the win, right at the end. And he was 4th in the standings heading to Fontana, the season finale. 4th in the standings behind, I think, like a Penske and You know, Chip Ganassi car, and Simon Pagenaud was amazing at Smith Peterson Motorsports. And then there's Wilson, head of, you know, loads of Penske's, Chip Ganassi cars, you know, these big teams, and he was right up there. Fortunately in the race he had an accident that fractured his pelvis, but he still ended up 6th in the final standings, came back for 2014, didn't quite work out with Dale Coyne, so they split. As, you know, Wilson at quite an old age for a single-seater racer driver, you know, he wanted to get a chance. He gambled. He could have been with Dale Coyne, you know, this year, but he gambled, and Andretti Autosport, you know, gave him a seat for the month of May, and he repaid them by being a top Honda qualifier for the Indy 500. You know, he just came in his second race of the year, and he was the top qualifier for Honda in 6th. And then, with the help of Honda, he was given these last 5 races of this season in that 25 car, and, you know, he got his only podium this year, you know, at Mid-Ohio, and I think nothing showed how great of a racer he was, how, you know, he had so much spatial awareness, he knew where the drivers were, he didn't make many mistakes, you know, like his old karting rival, say Jenson Button, you know, he's kind of like that, where he really wouldn't get in an accident on many occasions, and he made this superb move, you know, on one of the restarts in the race, you know, past Graham Rahal and Pablo Montoya, the title rivals, and he went past them in turns 5 and 6, and I think nothing shows how great of a racer he was more than that. That move, I've never really seen a move like that made at Mid-Ohio, and I probably won't see it made for many years to come. That's, you know, that's amazing. One of the last memories I have, you know, him as a racer. And then, you know, at Pocono he qualified well, very happy with the car. You know, he's right up there with his teammates, Ryan Hunter-Reay and Carlos Munoz, and, you know, he led a few laps in the race. You know, he's right up there. And yeah, then you know, Karam crashed out the lead, and unfortunately debris hit him, and yeah, you know that. So yeah, that was Justin Wilson. You know, sometimes I try and quantify why stuff like this happens to, you know, superb drivers, superb racers in motorsport. For every accident you have, you try and quantify it. And just like, say, Dan Weld in 2011, you know, he built for the future now. He come back to IndyCar. He's going to be a full-time driver in 2012. Andretti, and, you know, then Las Vegas happened, and the same was happening with Wilson. And, you know, they were working hard to make him a full-time driver for next year, and I have no doubt that, you know, someone would have stepped up and, you know, sponsored him for next year and make him a full-time driver again, you know, with Andretti next year. This was his big chance, all these years fighting for a chance at the top, and it goes, you know. You know, we never know what would happen if he had, you know, great equipment like next year. And yeah, as I said, my thoughts go out to his family. Like, it's very tough time, you know, and his friends and anyone who's associated with Justin Wilson. You know, they're a great human, you know, more than just, you know, the great driver that I've seen, you know, for over 15 years now. But yeah, so we just can't explain life, unfortunately, and yeah, it's terrible to see what happened on Sunday. Hopefully you won't experience this again for an extremely long time. Hopefully safety, you know, improves once again. But yeah, thank you for the memories, Justin Wilson, and rest in peace. So for the rest of this at Power Oversteer, we'll be looking ahead to the season finale this weekend with the GoPro Grand Prix of Sonoma held around the Sonoma Raceway in California. It marks the end of a tough and grueling 5 months and 16 rounds for the Verizon IndyCar Series. We'll be previewing the event and be looking at the championship contenders with 3 primary candidates for the Astar Cup this year. But before we look ahead, we're going to be looking back, as it's been a while since we've done one of these. It's been around 3 months, and since then there's been 10 rounds to look at, as the championship was heading into the month of May. Back then it was all about Penske and Chevrolet, and maybe looking at a dominance at the top of the championship. How times have changed since the Grand Prix of Indianapolis. And it would be a Chevrolet domination in qualifying for the Grand Prix of Indianapolis, as Will Power grabbed pole ahead of Scott Dixon and Helio Castroneves, has Chevrolet Power filled out the top 10 with the likes of Sebastian Savaglia in 8th and Stefano Coletti in 10th, a rare top 10 qualifying berth for the Monegasque driver, ahead of the lead Honda driver in qualifying of Jack Hawksworth for AJ Foyt in 11th. And on the first lap at the first corner, Helio Castroneves caused the only caution of the race when he punted Scott Dixon round, and the likes of Joseph Newgarden and Jack Hawksworth got caught up in it. And for the American and Brit, they only ended up in 20th and 23rd positions in the end. And it would be Will Power, though, who would avoid the chaos at the first corner and lead 65 laps on 4 different occasions to victory, his only win of the season so far, ahead of Graham Rahal, who was the top Honda finisher in second, as he went from 17th place, and thanks to superb strategy from his team and superb in and out laps from him, he managed to jump the likes of Juan Pablo Montoya, Sebastian Bourdais and Charlie Kimball. Castroneves would finish in 6th place over Tony Kanaan, Coletti getting his only top 10 of the year in 8th, with Takuma Sato in 9th and Scott Dixon recovering to 10th. And now is on to the big one, the 99th Indy 500. Before the race, though, there were big headlines, as in practice there were 3 Chevrolets flipping over, and James Hinchcliffe got into the turn 3 wall and suspension penetrated his cockpit and his thigh, but thanks to superb work from the Hamatro safety team, they managed to extract him quickly, save his life, and thankfully the Canadian driver needs to be well in the recovery to driving again next year. So for qualifying, there were alterations done to avoid cars flipping, so they had to qualify with race setups, and this meant that Scott Dixon grabbed pole ahead of Will Power and Simon Pagenaud, with Tony Kanaan 4th, Helio Castroneves 5th, and Justin Wilson being the top Honda qualifier in 6th, ahead of Sebastian Bourdais, Marco Andretti, Joseph Newgarden and JR Hildebrand for CFH Racing. And in the race there were crazy passing at the front. It was Penske 3 Chip Ganassi, it was Will Power and Helio Castroneves through the likes of Scott Dixon and Tony Kanaan, with Charlie Kimball and Juan Pablo Montoya coming into play in the second half of the race. And we saw lots of cautions as well, with 6 cautions in total, as on the first lap we saw Takuma Sato be aggressive against Sage Kerm, which collected the likes of Ryan Briscoe and James Davison in his Delco machine as well. And then we saw Brian Coulson crash out of turn 4 unfortunately on lap 64. Then on lap 113, Ed Carpenter and Oil Silber disagreed on an overtaking move, and on lap 153, Kanaan ruled himself out of contention when he crashed in turn 4. Then on lap 176, we saw Stefano Coletti, Sebastian Savaglia and Jack Hawksworth get together on the exit of turn 4. So from the run in the last 15-16 laps, we saw Charlie Kimball up there, we saw Will Power, Scott Dixon and Juan Pablo Montoya fighting for the win. But it would be the Colombian grabbing his second Indy 500 win, ahead of Will Power grabbing his best result in the Indy 500, and Charlie Kimball on the podium as well, ahead of his teammate Scott Dixon, with Graham Rahal ending up as the top Honda in the end in 5th, ahead of Marco Andretti, Helio Castroneves, JR Hildebrand with a strong 8th, Joseph Newgarden 9th and Simon Pagenaud in 10th, as Ryan Briscoe replacing James Hinchcliffe got in the car and climbed 19 positions in the race to 12th from a 31st starting position right on the back row. Superb job from the Australian, but it was the Colombian celebrating, and Chevy as well, as they had 8 cars in the top 10, just like in the Grand Prix as well. And so heading to Chevrolet Land, or the Jewel in Detroit, they were looking very strong. But boy, it would rain out a knockout for Honda there. As qualifying for the first duel in Detroit race was normal, with Will Power grabbing pole ahead of Harry Castroneves, Juan Pablo Montoya, with Takuma Sato breaking up the Penske party at the front, being the top Honda for AJ Foyt Racing in 4th, with Simon Pagenaud in 5th, Sebastian Bourdais 6th, Scott Dixon 7th, Coletti in 8th, Mark Andretti 9th, and James Jakes in 10th. But in the race, the rain came and caused chaos and hazard for everyone, with Andretti coming out on top, with Marco looking like he'd win the race for quite a long time until his last stop, before Carlos Munoz came through for his inaugural IndyCar Series win after starting 20th on the grid. He came through ahead of Andretti, with Simon Pagenaud in 3rd, Will Power 4th, Scott Dixon 5th, Harry Castroneves 6th, Jack Hawksworth 7th, Joseph Newgarden in 8th, Luca Firpi behind his CFH Racing teammate in 9th, and Juan Pablo Montoya grabbing a top 10 in a chaotic race that had 8 cautions. And Sage Cohen got a bit aggressive as he got a drive-through penalty for blocking on his way to 16th. And rain would play a big part in the second duel in Detroit race, as qualifying was washed out and so the grid was decided by entrant points entering that race. So Juan Pablo Montoya was on par ahead of Will Power, Helio Castroneves, Scott Dixon and Graham Rahal being the top Honda in 5th. But the race would turn out a bit differently, as even though Juan Pablo Montoya led large chunks of it, 35 laps on 2 different occasions, but there were many cautions once again, 7 of them, with lots of penalties for the likes of Graham Rahal, Tristan Volche, Ryan Briscoe and Sage Cohen. Trice, he really was a bull on parade that weekend. As Sebastian Bourdais won ahead of Takuma Sato, Graham Rahal recovering from that penalty to grab 3rd, same for Volche from his penalty to grab 4th for Dale Coyne, and Marco Andretti in 5th, with Connor Daly in 6th after leading 12 laps in the race, and Jack Hawksworth 7th, Ryan Hunter-Reay 8th, Gabby Chavez in 9th for Brian Herter Autosport, and Juan Pablo Montoya ending up in 10th in the end, has 8 Hondas were in the top 10, outnumbering the Chevrolets for the first time this season, after in the first race it was 7-3 to Chevrolet. Then it was on to the Texas Motor Speedway a week later, and at the beginning of June for the Firestone 600, as qualifying had a familiar feel, with Will Power and pole ahead of Simon Pagenaud, Helio Castroneves, Carlos Munoz, the top Honda runner, in 4th for Andretti Autosport, and Juan Pablo Montoya rounding out the top 5 ahead of Graham Rahal, Scott Dixon, Tony Kanaan, Charlie Kimball and Sage Cohen. And in the race we saw Scott Dixon lead 97 laps on 4 different occasions, as he won ahead of Tony Kanaan, Helio Castroneves, Juan Pablo Montoya, with Marco Andretti, the top Honda runner, ahead of his teammate Carlos Munoz, as we only had 1 caution throughout the whole race for debris on lap 84. We saw lots of penalties for the likes of Takuma Sato, Sebastian Bourdais, Joseph Newgarden and Stefano Coletti Trice, and Sage Cohen once again getting talked about in the steward's office as he finished in 12th place. We also saw Gabby Chavez round out the top 10 behind James Jakes, Ryan Briscoe in 8th, Charlie Kimball 7th, as we saw a 5-5 split in the top 10. As despite having the title sponsorship, the street course in Toronto didn't prove to be to Honda's liking, as the only race held outside of the United States of America this season had a familiar feel in qualifying, with Will Power grabbing pole ahead of Simon Pagenaud, Juan Pablo Montoya, Scott Dixon, Sebastian Bourdais, Luca Firpi in 6th, Helio Castroneves 7th, Takuma Sato, the top Honda runner, in 8th, Tony Kanaan and Graham Rahal rounding out the top 10. And in the race we saw Will Power lead the first 30 laps until a caution brought out on lap 29 due to James Jakes in turn 5 kind of changed the race, as there was another caution for debris in turn 8 on lap 41, as we saw CFH Racing take advantage of the caution flags, take advantage of the different strategy and grab the win after 85 laps, their first as a combined effort after Ed Carpenter and Sarah Fisher-Hartman Racing combined at the beginning of the year. And it was a 1-2 with Joseph Newgarden ahead of Luca Firpi, with Helio Castroneves in 3rd, Will Power 4th, Sebastian Bourdais 5th, Tony Kanaan 6th, Juan Pablo Montoya in 7th, Scott Dixon in 8th, Graham Rahal, the top Honda runner, down in 9th ahead of Takuma Sato, as once again it was Chevrolet dominating the top 10, 8-2-2. Then a couple of weeks later, at the end of June, we've had the most talked about race of this season, the divider, the MAV TV 500, where we saw the most lap lead changes ever, with 80 in the race. But once again, qualifying had a familiar feel to it as Simon Pagenaud grabbed pole, his first for Penske, ahead of Helio Castroneves, with Marco Andretti in third place, the top Honda for Andretti Autosport, ahead of Ed Carpenter, Juan Pablo Montoya, Tony Kanaan, Scott Dixon, Will Power, Takuma Sato and Sage Coram in 10th. But as I said, this race was mental, crazy, one of the most captivating IndyCar races I've seen in years, but also one which saw kind of a dress rehearsal in the first half of the race before the chaos in the second. As incredibly, it took 136 laps before the first caution of the race came out, as Helio Castroneves kind of got caught out in the first corner, fell back and found himself in between Will Power and Ryan Briscoe. And then we saw the second caution of the race on lap 158 when Air Carpenter kind of just went up into Joseph Newgarden and 4G out of turn 4. Then there was debris on the back straight for the next couple of cautions before on lap 241 Will Power and Takuma Sato got together on the front straight through no fault of their own. And then on lap 249 we saw a scary flip for Ryan Briscoe after he went over Ryan Hunter-Reay. Fortunately, the Aussie driver was fine after a superb run in the race. And it was Briscoe who actually only got the only penalty in the race on lap 152 and got a drive-through penalty for avoidable contact. But in the end, it was Graham Rahal who ended a 7-year drought for victory, as his Rahal Letterman machine beat out Tony Kanaan to first place, with Marco Andretti in third, Juan Pablo Montoya in fourth, Sage Coram grabbing his first top 5 in IndyCar in fifth, Scott Dixon in sixth, James Jakes in seventh, Charlie Kimball in eighth, Simon Pagenaud in ninth, and Jack Hawksworth in 10th. It was a 6-4 split for Chevy in the top 10, and it is a race that we're going to remember for years to come. After the yes it is, not quite, maybe, not sure, pack racing off Fontana is on to the ABC Supply Wisconsin 250 held round the historic Milwaukee Mile in mid-July. And qualifying had a slightly different feel to it as Joseph Newgarden grabbed CFH Racing's first pole ahead of Ryan Briscoe, the top Honda for Smith Peterson Motorsports, with Sage Coram in third, Tony Kanaan in fourth, James Jakes in fifth, Graham Rahal sixth, Charlie Kimball seventh, Juan Pablo Montoya eighth, Marco Andretti ninth, and Scott Dixon in 10th, with Helio Castroneves starting right at the back after he missed check-in in qualifying. And in the first half of the race, it looked like Joseph Newgarden would win this thing, as the American led 109 laps in total on 3 different occasions. But the caution flags on lap 114 due to James Jakes stalling out the pits in turn 1. On lap 131 due to the Aussie pair of Will Power and Ryan Briscoe getting together in turn 4, turned the race on its head. And Sebastian Bourdais was right there to take advantage, as on one occasion he virtually lapped the whole field as the Frenchman scorched to victory for KVSH Racing ahead of Helio Castroneves. Superb work from the captain to get his driver up onto the podium, with Graham Rahal in third, the top Honda, ahead of Juan Pablo Montoya. He finished fourth despite getting a drive-through penalty on that 100-2 speeding in the pit lane, with Joseph Newgarden rounding out the top 5 in the end. Tony Kanaan was 7th, Scott Dixon 7th, Marco Andretti 8th, Simon Pagenaud 9th, and Air Carpenter rounded out the top 10 with an 8-2 split to Chevy in the top 10. Hang on, I thought ovals were Honda territory. Maybe it will be in Iowa. Well, it did prove to be in the end for Honda at the Iowa Corn 300, but not in qualifying, as Helio Castroneves grabbed pole ahead of Tony Kanaan, Juan Pablo Montoya, Scott Dixon, Simon Pagenaud, Will Power, Joseph Newgarden, Marco Andretti in 8th, the top Honda runner for Andretti Autosport, ahead of Ryan Hunter-Reay, welcome to the 2015 championship, in 9th, and Sage Coram in 10th, as Sebastian Bourdais spun in qualifying to start last in 24th. And in the early part of the race we had a big incident for the championship, as Juan Pablo Montoya had something break on his car on lap 10 and went into the wall in turn 2. And on lap 25 we saw Stefano Coletti and Charlie Kimball somehow not get into the wall after they had contact in turn 3. And in the first half of the race we saw Helio Castroneves, the Tony Kanaan and Will Power really lead this race, but in the end it was Joseph Newgarden who led the most laps, 111 in total on 2 different occasions. But in the end, it was Ryan Hunter-Reay who won as he led the final 37 laps of the race to grab his first win of the season and really kickstart his season after a miserable first half. He won ahead of Newgarden, with Sage Cohen grabbing his first IndyCar podium in third, ahead of Graham Rahal, Carlos Munoz, Ed Carpenter, Marco Andretti, Ryan Briscoe, Sebastian Bourdais and Will Power ending up in 10th, as there were no penalties, strangely enough, after this race, and we saw a 5-5 split in the top 10. 2 weeks after Iowa, it's on to the Mid-Ohio Sports Car course at the beginning of this month for the Honda Indy 200. Has qualifying had a bit more of a familiar feel to it. Scott Dixon grabbed pole for Chip Ganassi Racing with a new lap record of a 104.5814, ahead of Will Power, Sebastian Bourdais, Helio Castroneves, Joseph Newgarden, Charlie Kimball, Ryan Hunter-Reay in 7th, the top Honda for Andretti Autosport, Tony Kanaan, Luca Firpi, and Pablo Montoya rounded out the top 10, ahead of the home state kid Graham Rahal in 13th. And Dixon would lead the first 22 laps of the race, as we saw caution on lap 3 due to Charlie Kimball ending up in the turn 6 gravel after his rear tyre got punctured by Will Power, who's rejoining the circuit in turns 4 and 5. And on lap 21 we saw debut on various locations of the course for the second caution after Takuma Sato and Sage Cohen had got together. And unfortunately for Sato, he had to retire on lap 60 after getting together with Cohen once again and running out of parts to fit to his car. And the young American would be the talk of the town for his incident on lap 66 after he spun in turn 4. And after the race there were some accusations flying around, but in the end he proved innocent, and in the end he ended up in 22nd a lap down after getting some further penalties as he went to the back of the field on lap 6 due to starting out of line, and on lap 69 for pitting during a closed pit. And thanks to the caution, some of the top runners would end up down the field, such as Montoya in 11th, Newgarden in 13th, and Motorcycle maybe for Bourdais in 17th, with Castroneves in 15th as well. But it worked out for Rahal as he won the race, his second win of the season, and 30 years after his father won here as well in Mid-Ohio. A special day for Rahal. Has Justin Wilson grabbed a superb second, his first podium of the year for Andretti Autosport, and he made one of the moves of the race, one of the moves I've ever seen around Mid-Ohio, when on the restart on lap 26 he went past Pablo Montoya and Graham Rahal in turns 5 and 6 with a daring outside move, brilliant move from the Brit. Has Simon Pagenaud rounded out the podium in third for Penske, his top finish of the year, I believe, and finally on the podium for Penske after a tough year, ahead of Scott Dixon, Tony Kanaan, Tristan Volche in 6th, Ryan Hunter-Reay in 7th, Jack Hawksworth in 8th, Carlos Munoz in 9th, and Marco Andretti rounding out the top 10 as we saw a 7-3 split to Honda. It seems I miscounted, as there was one more race I hadn't covered, and that was the ABC Supply 500 from Pocono last weekend. As in qualifying, Helio Castroneves grabbed pole ahead of Simon Pagenaud, Will Power, Joseph Newgarden, Graham Rahal the top Honda in 5th, Carlos Munoz, Justin Wilson, Ryan Hunter-Reay, Takuma Sato and Sebastian Bourdais rounded out the top 10, as hometown favourite Marco Andretti had a poor qualifying down in 22nd. And in the race we had a great battle at the front involving the likes of Joseph Newgarden, Helio Castroneves, Tony Kanaan and Ryan Hunter-Reay. And Newgarden would lead the most laps this race with 47 in total on 2 occasions, as we saw plenty of cautions, 12 in total in a race that was littered with crashes, unfortunately. As we saw Jack Hawksworth lose a tyre on lap 30 after a pit stop. On lap 37 we saw Sebastian Bourdais into the turn 2 wall. Then Jack Hawksworth lost it, collecting Charlie Kimball on lap 85. On lap 93 we saw Graham Rahal get taken out by Tristan Volche in turn 3. And then we saw Davey on the front stretch on lap 109. Then on lap 132 we saw Tony Kanaan into the turn 2 wall. And then it was Marco Andretti into the turn 2 wall on lap 139. Then on lap 163, the most unusual caution I've ever seen, when a fox invaded the track and made a beautiful dismount out of it, jumping over the fences. And then on lap 167 saw Helio Castroneves into the turn 1 wall, wrecking his championship chances.
And then we saw the incident involving Sage Kerm and Justin Wilson on lap 180, with Gabby Chavez bringing out the last caution of the race on lap 197 due to his car slowing down on track. As Ryan Hunter won the race ahead of Joseph Newgarden and Juan Pablo Montoya in third, Will Power fourth, Carlos Munoz fifth, Takuma Sato sixth, Simon Pagenaud seventh, Ryan Briscoe eighth, Scott Dixon ninth, and James Jakes rounding out the top 10.
Now that we've caught up and are up to date, now let's look ahead to the GoPro Grand Prix of Sonoma.
Sonoma is no stranger to IndyCars. This year's event marks a decade since the series returned American open wheel racing to the Californian circuit. There was one event here way back in 1970 when USAC visited and Dan Gurney won in his All-American Racers Eagle Ford. Fast forward 35 years and it would be Tony Kanaan's turn to taste the champagne with Andretti Green Racing. And then in the following year it was his teammate Marco Andretti who won here in his rookie season, his inaugural series win, and the youngest winner at the time to boot at 19 years, 5 months and 14 days. That record will be broken by Graham Rahal at the 2008 St. Petersburg event. And it's amazing to think for Andretti that is one of only 2 wins for him in the IndyCar Series, with his other win coming at Iowa in 2011. And it was Scott Dixon winning round here for Chip Ganassi Racing in 2007, and his teammate Darryl Franchitti won round here in 2009. But this place is known as a Team Penske Palace, as they have the most wins for a team with 5 round here, and Will Power's the most wins for a driver around here with 3, as Harry Castroneves won in 2008, Ryan Briscoe won in 2012, and then his fellow Aussie Power won in 2010, 2011 and in 2013. But it was the Kiwi Scott Dixon who won round here for Chip Ganassi Racing last year with another masterclass in fuel saving on a road course. Sometimes it feels like he's driving with a different fuel tank to everyone else. And this 2.2 mile, 3.5 kilometer circuit is kind of known more for strategy than for overtaking, despite attempts to make it a bit more overtaker friendly in recent years. As in 2012, the back hairpin turn 7 was made tighter, as the IndyCar circuit now uses the inner loop instead of the outer loop used by NASCAR. Turn 9 was widened by 10 feet, but it's still a very tight chicane. And turn 11, the last corner, was extended by 200 feet. So who's going to win the 85 lap race this year? Well, it's a very tricky, undulating circuit. You know, you're kind of not expected to make many overtaker moves in the race. It's more about keeping the car on the circuit, as if you get one wheel in the dirt, it's very, difficult to recover from that. And if you get the car in the dirt, it's going to cost you loads and loads of time. So I expect Scott Dixon and Graham Rahal to be right up there. Again, has Rahal won the last, road course race at Mid-Ohio in his Buckeye State. And Scott Dixon, of course, is a 2-time winner round here. And they're both in the championship hunt and they've got nothing to lose heading into this race. And especially for Rahal after that disappointment in Pocono. He's been very strong in every road course. Been the top Honda almost every event this year. I expect him to really be up there. I expect his team to pull out, great strategy once again, like they did at Mid-Ohio, like they did at the Grand Prix of Indianapolis. I expect him to be right up there. Same with Dixon. As I said, he's a master of fuel saving on these road courses. And if strategy again plays a huge part in this race, I expect him to be right up there once again. Of course, Montoya is going for a championship rather than a win, so I expect him to be a bit more safe maybe on the strategy side. Penske maybe just hoping to hit their marks on the strategy side, and of course they have Will Power and Harry Castroneves, outside championship contenders, but most of they'll be helping Montoya maybe in the race. And Simon Pagenaud looking to end a year on a high that's been very up and down with the captain this season. So who else is there apart from the big teams and the championship contenders? Well, the CFH Racing with Joseph Newgarden, a long shot in the championship hunt, but it would be great to see the American round off a superb year with another great result. And his teammate, perhaps the dark horse for this race, Luca Firpi, who's been out of the car for quite a few weeks since Mid-Ohio. He's got his a maiden IndyCar podium back in Toronto with the team, and I expect him to be very strong round here, at least fighting for a top 10 position. For Andretti, well, there is Marco, of course, who won in 2006, won the Indy Lights race here back in 2005, and is always a contender everywhere. He's very consistent nowadays, but as I said, it's been ages since he won round here and won an IndyCar event, so it'd be nice to see Marco right up there. And of course, I'm wishing all my luck to Oil Serbia in Justin Wilson's car this weekend. So I'm perhaps going to go for Graham Rahal to win this, just from Scott Dixon. I'm hoping it's like that for the championship. Not that I'm biased a bit for Rahal to win the championship. I would, like Montoya or Rahal to win the championship and Dixon as well. But I just feel like Rahal going for it all. His team's been superb in the strategy this year. I think, he's going to be right up there. But who do you think will be right up there? Let me know in the comment section below. But whoever wins this race, I'm sure they're going to enjoy the wine in the wine country after it. For the 10th season in a row, the championship will be decided at the season finale. As heading into the GoPro Grand Prix of Sonoma, we have 6 drivers that are mathematically eligible to win the Astor Cup. But with the way the point system works in the Verizon IndyCar Series, Joseph Newgarden is 87 points back of Juan Pablo Montoya, and if we have, say, 24 drivers like we had at Pocono, you're guaranteed to score at least 12 points just by taking part in the race, so that virtually wipes out the young American hopeful from winning his inaugural Verizon IndyCar Series crown. So that leaves the top 5 to look at, but then Helio Castroneves is, 77 points back, so he's probably ruled out. And Will Power is over 60 points back of Montoya and would really need a miracle in the race to regain his IndyCar crown. So that leaves 3 drivers to look at. And we're going to begin with the Iceman, the 3-time Verizon IndyCar Series champion and 2008 Indy 500 winner, Scott Dixon. The Chip Ganassi Racing driver is a veteran of this situation, has his 3 championships to attest to. It's just remarkable that the Kiwi always ends up there in the final reckoning at the end of a season, as despite having, say, a poor start or a couple of races off the board, just a poor run of form somewhere in the season, he always claws himself up the standings in the end. Since 2007, he has always finished in the top 3 in the championship, a remarkable form of consistency, like, say, Jorge Lorenzo in MotoGP. They're just always up there. In 2006, he finished 4th in the championship and won the championship in his inaugural season in the Indy Racing League, as it was known back then, back in 2003, before Chip Ganassi got saddled with poor Toyota engines in 2004 and 2005. And the only other times that Dixon has finished outside the top 5 since he's been racing in America was back in 2001 and 2002 in the kart series. So out of 17 seasons now of racing in America, he's only finished outside the top 5 in the standings 4 times. Just a remarkable record of consistency from him. And he will have to rely on all of that experience this weekend, as he's 47 points back of Juan Pablo Montoya in the championship. He's grabbed a couple of wins this year at Texas, where the Chip Ganassi cars came on strong under the lights, and at Long Beach, his first win there in the Verizon IndyCar Series. Really remarkable stat that, as it seems he's won everywhere in the championship. He's also grabbed an additional podium at Alabama, a usual podium. He's always finished on the podium there since the event got added to the IndyCar calendar back in 2010. Another remarkable stat from him. He's grabbed a couple of poles as well at the Indy 500, where he finished 4th in the end, and at Mid-Ohio as well, where he was strong in the first part of the race before the cautions kept falling down, but still he ended up 4th in the end. So if he grabs pole in Sonoma, we know where he's going to finish at the end of the race, it seems. But he has led 272 laps, the most out of the top three. He's finished the most laps out of the top three, over 2,000 of them. And he has a quite strong average finish of 8.1, the weakest of the top three, but the best average start of 5.9. And he will need to rely on that strong qualifying form round Sonoma, a track that kind of relies on strategy more than, being able to overtake. It's very tight and, twisty. And as we saw last year, you have to rely on being a master of fuel economy as well, and strategy from his Chip Ganassi team, where they more often than not seem to strike it right with Dixon. So for Dixon, you have to rely on all of his tools at his disposal, all of that experience to win this race, and it's very much doable, as he showed last year, as he showed in 2007, and as he was very strong at Mid-Ohio, the last road course. I expect Dixon to be right up there for the win. As I said, he's qualified extremely strongly this year, and so he'll probably be in the hunt for the pole as well. And as I said, I expect him to at least be on the podium in Sonoma. And so that would mean that Montoya would have to finish in the lower echelons of the top 10. And so it's actually quite doable for Dixon to, grab the championship, considering that double points are on offer. Without the double points on offer, Montoya's virtually won the championship already. But with double points, he's still got a strongish chance, Dixon, to win this. And I guess I should be, very thankful we got double points for the finale. But yeah, for Scott Dixon, it's just going to be all-out attack with fuel saving probably in the race. And so, I expect him to be right up there in the race. It's just going to depend what will happen to Montoya and the guy in second place in the championship, Graham Rahal. Let's look at the rise of the American this year. So before we look at Graham Rahal this year, I thought we'd look at his Verizon IndyCar Series record heading into this season. As in 7 years, he joined the championship in 2008. He had one win at St. Petersburg in 2008 to become the youngest ever winner in the Verizon IndyCar Series. He had 9 podiums and 43 top 10 finishes in 115 races. Well, this year in 15 races, he has 2 wins after the madness at Fontana and at home in Mid-Ohio, has 6 podiums and has 10 top 10 finishes to lie second in the championship with 466 points. This is a totally different driver this year. This is a totally different team this year than the one that had struggled since Graham joined the team in 2013. They've been making personnel changes every off-season, trying to find the chemistry in this team, trying to find a formula that works in this team. And in the past off-season, they had promoted a couple of guys who had been with the team for quite a long time, added a couple of guys as well to help with, say, setup changes and understanding some components on the cars. And Bobby Rahal take himself off the mic, speaking to Graham in the races, which got a bit chippy at times last year. And it seems like they just found the formula this year, as with the introduction of the aero kits. We're all looking at Andretti Autosport to be the top Honda team, but they struggled immensely in the first half of the year, while Rahal and American Racing have just kept their head down and have been the top Honda team more often than not this year with Graham at the wheel, and they've just racked up the results, and now they are challenging for the championship heading into Sonoma, this single car team against the mighty Team Penske and Chip Ganassi Racing. It's fantastic to see. And it's fantastic to see Graham Rahal, how he's just matured and become this, cool, calm, collected individual this year, and how he's matured even from St. Petersburg, where he was a bit hot-headed after the race. He got a bit chirpy on Twitter, went a bit Sage Kerm on everyone. But since NOLA, he's just, been the top Honda man, and it's been impressive how he's just handled things. Finding himself in the championship hunt, and how he's just driven and looked cool, calm and collected out on the track. Well, maybe not in Pocono after he got taken out, but apart from that, he's just been very impressive this year. And heading into this season, I was wondering if Graham Rahal would ever fulfill that potential we saw as a teenager, as a guy in his early 20s, where in 2006 in the former Atlantic Series, he grabbed 4 wins on the way to finishing runner-up in that series too, Simon Pagenaud. Then they both got promoted to Champ Car in 2007, and alongside Sebastian Bourdais at Newman Haas Racing, he looked impressive. As a rookie, grabbed a few podiums on his way to 5th in the championship. He also made a couple of outings in A1 GP, has a Lebanon driver. Probably got the country wrong there. But in 2008, with Newman Haas and Anglican Racing, he won in his rookie event at St. Petersburg. And then in 2009, he grabbed pole at St. Petersburg, at Kansas, grabbed a couple of podiums at Richmond and Montegui, on the way to finishing 7th in the championship that year. And this was perhaps a driver that looked like he could develop into a championship, fighter before this year. A second generation racer who could be, winning races and, challenging for championships. Unlike, say, Marco Andretti, who's been very consistent and is a very consistent driver, but has never stepped up that level to challenge for, wins even in races and challenge for, the championship overall. And so in 2010, unfortunately, he had to be let go by Newman Haas. Lanigan Racing, he drove for the likes of Sarah Fisher Racing, Ray Hall Letterman Racing at the Indy 500, Brian Reinbold Racing, and then Newman Haas Racing towards the end of the year when they could, pick him up again. And then in 2011 and 2012, he was with Chip Ganassi racing in the B team alongside Charlie Kimball, while the A team was Scott Dixon and Dario Franchitti. And despite finishing 9th and 10th in the championship in those years and looking incredibly impressive, at races such as Sao Paulo in 2011, finishing 2nd, at the Indy 500, finishing 3rd that year, and at the Milwaukee Mile, finishing 2nd again. And then finishing 2nd at Texas in 2012, perhaps his best chance of grabbing a win in those years when he, tagged the wall late in the race and allowed Justin Wilson and Dale Coyne to come through and win that race. He's just incredibly frustrating to follow in those years because, apart from looking great at those times, he could be incredibly inconsistent and just look off the ball on some weekends. You wonder, why has he got that seat? And at the end of 2012, he was actually let go and he moved to Ray Hall at Managan Racing, to his father's team. And despite getting the odd podium at Long Beach in 2013, at the first race in Detroit in 2014 when he was chasing down Will Power in the late stages of that race, he has once again just been incredibly inconsistent with a few top 10 finishes. But most weekends last year, I wouldn't have known he had actually been in the race unless he just, said his name to me, because it was just amazing how off the ball the team were, how disappointing they were last year. And in 2013, he finished 18th in the championship, and last year he was 19th in the championship with 345 points, one of the lowest scoring full-time drivers in the championship. Well, this year, of course, he's one of the highest scoring full-time drivers. And so heading into this year, if he said, Graham Rahal will be challenging for the championship heading into Sonoma, I would have told you to get off the crack, go to rehab, or told you to stop being a massive fanboy. It's just been an incredible turnaround this year, and it's, as I say, it's just fantastic to see him finally fulfilling that potential that we saw, many years ago. And so this year in St. Petersburg, as I said, he probably should have got a top 10 finish. He definitely had the pace to do that, to be the top Honda finisher, but he got a bit too aggressive against Charlie Kimball in the race, got rightly penalised, and as I said, he got a bit aggressive after the race as well on Twitter. But then in Noda, he finished 8th in the tricky conditions there, and then in Long Beach, he finished 11th. I believe he was the second top Honda behind Marco Andretti in that race. And then in Alabama and the Grand Prix of Indianapolis, he grabbed a couple of second place finishes where the strategy was just called right by his team, and it allowed him to be aggressive in those races late in the race in Alabama, making moves left, right and centre, and then the Grand Prix of Indianapolis doing aggressive in-laps and out-laps and allowing him to jump the likes of Pablo Montoya, Sebastian Bourdais, Charlie Kimball to that second place in that race. And then the Indy 500, where the qualifying didn't go well, but in the race he ended up in 5th place, the top Honda, I believe, ahead of Marco Andretti in that race. And then in the first race to Detroit, unfortunately got taken out there. But in the second race in Detroit, he finished 3rd on the podium after a very cool, calm and collected display by him and by his team as well, calling the strategy in those tricky conditions of that race. And then in Texas, the only race this year where he's looked off the ball, he really struggled to manage the tyres and that race, they would go off long before, most other drivers. And so he only ended up 15th in that race. But he's back on form in Toronto, finishing 9th. I believe he was top Honda in that race, again ahead of Takuma Sato. And then in Fontana, being right there at the end. He made a few aggressive moves, but I believe almost every driver in the race made aggressive moves. But he's in there at the last to grab that win, a much needed win, and the confidence that's flowed since that win has definitely shown itself in the results since that race in Fontana. As in Milwaukee, he grabbed another podium in 3rd place. Again, great strategy from the team, despite the errors not really falling for them, but it allowed Rahal to be aggressive again later in the race and to grab that 3rd place. And then in Iowa, finishing 4th, where Honda looked, on form. And in Mid-Ohio, where again the cautions this time fell for him, where, particularly that last caution where it fell for him when he was in pit lane, it allowed him to gain tons of seconds on the field. But he was being under attack from Justin Wilson, late in the race after that restart. And I believe the Rahal, maybe even of last year, would have maybe looked up, maybe made the odd mistake to, allow him to lose that win. But this year he's just cool and calm and won his home race. A win that perhaps means as much as, say, an Indy 500 win. And, for Rahal heading into Pocono, he's, full of confidence, and he looked decent in the race, despite those fuel issues. But then he was having this battle with Justin Wilson, in the last corner, and they were managing their battle fine, it looked like. But then Voltaire just came out of nowhere, dive bombed, put his nose where it shouldn't have belonged, went on the grass and took out Rahal, quite rightfully, a bit angry with the Frenchman after that. And Voltaire's, been punished since then, with points being deducted in the championship and getting a fine from IndyCar. And so heading into Sonoma, he's 34 points back off Juan Pablo Montoya. And he has those 2 wins, those 6 podiums. He completed almost 2,000 laps this year. He's only led 76 laps. That's the 2nd least amount out of the drivers in the top 10, with only Marco Andretti having, less laps led with 56. And his average start is only 11.3. Again, the 2nd least amount in the top 10 compared to Marco Andretti at 11.7. You never guess why those two stick out of the drivers in the top 10, because those are the only 2 Honda drivers in the top 10. But his average finish has been 7.9, the 2nd best in the field behind Montoya. And so that just shows how consistent he has been in races, how he's just turned up in the races, how his team has turned up as well with some superb strategy calls, as I've said. And it's just worked for them in most races this year. But like Scott Dixon, he will be ruining the odd races where he has not got the result, like at Pocono, like at Detroit, like at Texas, where he hasn't been, closer to Montoya. Well, for Dixon, you'd be looking at, say, St. Petersburg and Iowa, where he had mechanical issues and where he set, fastest laps in, say, Iowa, and at the 2nd race in Detroit, where he got taken out by his teammate Charlie Kimball. Rahal will be, similarly looking at those odd races as wondering why he wasn't closer to Montoya heading into the season finale. But just like Dixon as well, he's got nothing to lose heading into this race. He's got everything to win, and I'm going to enjoy seeing an aggressive Graham Rahal this race, like the Rahal we saw at Alabama, at the Grand Prix of Indianapolis, at the later stages of the Milwaukee Mile race as well. It's going to be enjoyable seeing his team maybe being aggressive on the strategy and seeing Rahal being aggressive as well. He's got a superb record on the road courses this year, heading to Sonoma with, that win in the last one at Mid-Ohio and a couple of 2nd places in Alabama at the Grand Prix of Indianapolis as well. So do I think Graham Rahal could win this race and win the championship? Definitely. I can back this Graham Rahal. Not the one that started the year, but this Graham Rahal I can definitely back and see winning this race, at least finishing on the podium alongside, Scott Dixon. I don't know who the other guy will be on the podium. But yeah, I can definitely see him winning this race and maybe even winning the championship as well, nicking it from Montoya at the last. I have faith in this Graham Rahal, and it's just been fantastic seeing him and his team perform, really well this year and being the top Honda running most races this year. But we've got to talk about one more guy, the championship leader since the beginning of this season, since St. Petersburg. But all the pressure is on Juan Pablo Montoya heading to Sonoma. But the almost 40-year-old, it feels weird to say that Colombian dealt with the pressure well in Pocono, a 500-mile race, the type of race he probably needed and wanted, as he has a stellar record on the 500-milers and American open wheel racing car. And Rahal had taken massive chunks out of his lead in Iowa and Mid-Ohio, reducing his lead to a single-digit figure heading to Pocono. But Montoya just drove his normal race in Pocono, grabbed a podium, coupled with Rahal's misfortune, has extended his lead to 34 points and broken a 500-point barrier heading to Sonoma. And this is the second year for the Colombian back in an American open wheel racing car, back in single-seaters after it felt like raced in a couple of years in NASCAR back in 2012 and 2013. And he came back with the same aggressive style that made him burst on to the European open wheel scene back in 1997 in F3000, winning the title in 1998, and onto the American open wheel scene back in 1999 in the kart series, winning that title, and in 2000 winning the Indy 500 in one of the most impressive rookie displays the Speedway has ever seen. But that style just meant he burnt up his tyres last year, particularly on the street course, and so he couldn't really last a full stint, last his full stint until he had to pit for fuel. And so sometimes he had to pit early in races. And we saw that at St. Petersburg, where he finished 15th, at Detroit, where he finished 12th and 13th, at Toronto, where he was nowhere all weekend long in those couple of races, and on the road courses in Alabama, where he had superb pace in the wet, but was too aggressive in the end and spun and ended up in 21st. In the end, finishing at 11th in Mid-Ohio. And so he kind of depended on his oval form to finish high up in the championship last year, where the Triple Crown races paid out double points. So guess where he was strongest last year? At the Indy 500, he finished 5th in the race with the fastest lap. In Pocono, he won the race after grabbing pole. And in the season finale at Fontana, he finished 4th to grab 4th in the final standings, as he was also strong in the ovals in Texas, grabbing a podium there. In the Milwaukee Mile, grabbing a podium there as well. And in Iowa, where he was very strong in the race, grabbing the fastest lap until he got involved with Ed Carpenter. So heading into this season, he had lots of homework to do. He had to change and adapt his style, particularly with the aero kit, and maybe with the addition of the aero kit helped him to adapt to this more manageable style he has on the tyres this year, as he showed at St. Petersburg, where Will Power was going to lead in that race, not like he was going to win, but Montoya kept with him on the black tyres compared to Powell on the red tyres, and that enabled the Colombian to jump him in the final round of stops and win that race. A very impressive win, and he has led the championship since that race all season long. And in NOLA, he grabbed the top 5 in those tricky conditions. At Long Beach, he grabbed a podium after intense pressure from, I believe, Simon Pageau in that race. In Alabama, it didn't quite work out for him on the strategy side and pace-wise, so he ended up 14th. But in the Grand Prix of Indianapolis, he grabbed another podium in 3rd. In Detroit, he grabbed a couple of top 10s, despite not having the best pace. And again, the changeable conditions, very easy to get caught out there. In Toronto, he finished 7th. And then on the ovals at Texas, he finished 4th. At Fontana, he finished 4th. At Milwaukee, he finished 4th. And of course, he won the big one, the Indianapolis 500, with another impressive display, just looking in control that whole race, racing from the middle of the pack towards the front in the first half of the race, and then in the second half of the race, fighting at the front with the likes of Tony Kanaan, Scott Dixon, his teammate Will Power, grabbing that win from him in the last few laps of that race, grabbing his second Indy 500 win in hugely impressive style, just like he grabbed his first win in hugely impressive style back in 2000. And after 3/4 of the season, Montoya would kind of cruise to the championship with this incredible consistency, with only one finish outside of the top 10 in those first 12 races. But then we headed to Iowa, and I think a part broke on his car as he went into the wall early in that race and finished in 24th. And then in Mid-Ohio, like so many other drivers and teams, he got caught out by the cautions and ended up in 11th place. But he bounced back in Pocono. It'll be interesting to see how Penske handle his strategy in Sonoma. Will they just be covering off Rahal and Dixon, pit when they do? Will they send like Will Power, Simon Pagino, or Harry Neves out in front as a hare for Dixon and Rahal to chase and maybe pull them off their strategies, more in line with the other three Penske cars, as that's the main advantage for Montoya. He's got a bit of a cushion to play with, and he's got very strong teammates, particularly in Will Power around Sonoma, but also Harry Neves and Simon Pagino as well to back him up, as well as, Graham Rahal is a single car effort, but he's got a whole of Honda, behind him. And Scott Dixon has, Tony Kanaan and Charlie Kimball with him, but he's a bit further back in the championship. It'll be interesting to see how Penske plays. It has heading to Sonoma. Montoya has 2 wins on the year, 5 podiums. They had 145 laps. Has an average start of 6.5, which is actually the worst out of the Penske lot. Pretty interesting to see, but he does have the best average finish in the field of 6.9, just underlining his incredible consistency this year. I just can't wait to see how this all plays out in Sonoma this Sunday. Let me know who you think will win the 2015 Verizon IndyCar Series Championship in the comment section below. So there we go, the 2015 Verizon IndyCar Series season will end this weekend. It feels just like yesterday they were revving up the engines at the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg to start this thing, and hopefully next year we'll have an expanded calendar and it will be longer than these meagre 5 months. But what a 5 months they have been. Of course the season has ended on a tragic note, but before then we were having some fantastic racing, some awesome battles out on track and in the championship, and the addition of aero kits this season has had another dimension to the series. But hopefully at the GoPro Grand Prix of Sonoma we'll most importantly have a safe race and some fitting tributes to a badass driver. I will see you after the dust has settled from Sonoma with my 2015 Verizon IndyCar Series season review. But sign out for watching not just this Power Oversteer but the previous Power Oversteers covering IndyCar, and hopefully next year I can cover the full season. But I will see you for the review, and goodbye, Justin Wilson.